the Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and today we're baking a loaf of bread. So there's really remarkably few ingredients you need in order to bake bread. You can use more than this, but for a basic loaf, we're going to start with some bread flour. Can you use all-purpose? Sure you can. We'll go over a little bit more about bread flour in a little bit though. We're going to need some yeast, a little salt, some water. We're going to use a little bit of cornmeal. Now there are a lot of different ways that you can make bread. Humans have been making bread for thousands of years. This is the way I do it. So we're going to need a total of 3 cups of flour, but we're going to start with 1. That's going to go into a large-ish bowl. We're going to need a little bit of yeast. I got a teaspoon of instant rise here, and got about 9.5 ounces of just tap water. Now a lot of times people will tell you you need warm water. This is going to be a long rise starter here, so it's not going to make much difference what temperature this is. I'm going to take a moment here and just stir this together. It doesn't need to be completely smooth because this is going to sit for several hours before we use it. I often mix this up overnight and let it sit in the refrigerator with a cover on it. So when that starter's been run for several hours, it's going to puff up quite a bit as that yeast gets going in there. Yeast is alive, so what it's doing is it's starting to digest the starch that's in the flour. And as it does that, it generates carbon dioxide, which causes it to rise up and get foamy. So this is our starter. We'll use that here to actually get our dough going. So I've got a good sized bowl here. I'm using glass so it's a little easier for you to see. A lot of times I would do this in like a stainless bowl, but this is going to be easier to see. I'm going to take 2 more cups of flour, put them in the bowl. So we've got that. Set that aside. We're going to need a teaspoon of salt. I'm using a non-iodized salt here. I particularly like the way that iodized salt works with yeast, but just kind of mix that together a little bit. And then I'm going to take the starter and just kind of slide that right on in there. You can do this all in one bowl if you want to. Just start off with a big enough bowl. And we're going to mix that together. And then we're going to need to tip that out and knead it for a little bit. But we got to get it to come together first. Now if you ask yourself, why didn't I put the salt in at the beginning? Well, salt does more than one thing in bread. It's not just there for flavor, although flavor is definitely a part of it. It also slows down your yeast. So you don't really want to put salt into your starter. You put the salt in when you're making the dough. Okay, so that's probably about as far as I'm going to get it mixed with the spatula. I'm just going to go ahead and get all the stuff off of there. And then we do it with the hands. And we're going to just kind of work this until all that flour is incorporated into the dough. Okay, so we've been kneading this for a little while, and it's starting to really smooth out and come together. We've got a nice workable dough here that's not too sticky. Keep in mind that if you need to add a little bit more water, do it slowly, just a teaspoon at a time, and keep working it in until you get to the point you like. If you do get a dough that's a little too wet, you can add a little bit more flour to it. Just knead it right in. One of the reasons that we're doing the kneading is to develop the gluten in the flour. This kind of gives you where your texture comes from. If you just mix it together without doing that, you're not going to get that nice chew in a loaf. So I'm going to put it back in the bowl, put the plastic wrap back over the top of it. So while we're waiting for that dough to rise, and I did put it somewhere kind of warm. Basically, I just took the whole bowl, put some plastic wrap over the top of it, and stuck it in my microwave. Don't turn the microwave on. It's just going to be a warm, safe place for it to rise for a little while. Let's talk a little bit about some of the equipment you're going to possibly want. Now, this, if you kind of wondered what that was when I had it sitting underneath everything, is a baking stone, also sometimes referred to as a pizza stone. Basically, this is a big chunk of ceramic that goes in your oven. And this holds heat, and when you put your bread directly on it, it's going to transfer heat very quickly and help with the bread. Do you need one of these? No, you don't. It's nice to have. Another optional piece of equipment here is a peel. You can use these for making pizza. They work really well for bread. You can buy these things. I made this one out of 1/4-inch plywood with a belt sander and a jigsaw. So you do want to make sure that it's got a little bit of an angle on the front so you can get things on and off of it. You want to make sure that the handle is stiff enough to work with. We'll go over how this works here in a little bit. If you don't want to fool around with this and this, there's nothing wrong with using a sheet pan. Okay, you can make your loaf right on this, bake it right on this, without having to screw around with either of these two things. Another little piece of equipment which is nice to have, and totally optional, there are other things you can use. This is a lame, okay? Basically, this is a razor blade on a little stick. Now, how do you use this? Well, you use it for scoring the top of the loaf. We'll show you that here when we get a little bit further along. If you don't have one of these, you can use a really sharp knife or a single-edge razor blade. That works just fine. Let's talk a little bit about the setup for our oven for doing this. So I got a couple of different racks in here right now. I've got one set low, one set high. I've got a cast iron skillet down here on the bottom rack. Why do we do this? Well, I'm going to show you a little trick about how to get some steam in your oven, which is going to help your bread when it goes in. I've got an oven thermometer over here. This here will help you get a true read on how hot your oven is, because the readout on a lot of home ovens is not as accurate as you might hope. That'll help us get a real idea of exactly how hot this is. And then I've got the baking stone on the upper rack, and then we're going to preheat the oven for a good half hour before the bread goes in. And you want to make sure that that thermometer is far enough back that you get a good read, but still close enough to the front that you can actually read it. So that's how we're going to set things up. I do want to mention real quickly that when we do that water step, make sure you don't get any water on the glass door of your oven. Cold water on a hot oven door can crack your glass. You don't want to do that. So our dough's been rising for a while. The temperature of your kitchen can make a difference as to how long this takes too. Usually an hour to 2 hours. So this is our first rise. What we're going to do what they call punching it down. Basically, we're just going to knock some of the air out of it. We're going to work it a little bit until we get it out of the bowl, because it's pretty well stuck all the way around. There's that. And then we're going to take a moment and form that into a loaf. So the texture of this has changed considerably since our first time around. It's definitely softer now. We've got a little bit more, the moisture has really, gotten into the flour at this point. So I'm putting a little bit of flour on the countertop here. You can use a cutting board if you want, but this is what they call bench flour. If you hear them use that term, there's nothing special about the flour. It just means that you're putting it on your work surface. Helps keep things from sticking. So I'm going to form that into a loaf that's a little longer than it is wide. Get my peel out here. Now I'm going to dust that with a little bit of flour here. And I mentioned something about cornmeal earlier. I use a little bit of cornmeal too. This is going to help it keep from sticking to the to the wood. If you don't use this, it will stick and it will not come off of there very well. So, now the shape of the loaf is up to you. You can make round, you can make long, you can make short, but we're going to kind of go for kind of this torpedo shape here. And I'm going to put plastic wrap back over the top. And we're going to let this rise for probably about another hour. We want it to about double in size. We got our loaf on the peel. We got our oven nice and preheated. And the reason we don't want that to stick, you just want to be able to wiggle that right out of there. Now, we got our water in our pan. We're going to go ahead and close that, and we're going to let this go for about 30 minutes. We're going to check it at about 25. I've got it set for 450 right now, and I preheated it for a good 40 minutes before we put anything in the oven. You want to make sure that you got time for that skillet and that stone to really heat up good. So, been a little over 25 minutes. We checked it at 25. It looked pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and pull it on out of there. We got a nice color on it. We got good crust. We're going to close the oven. We're going to set it on a wire rack to cool for a while. You can see how scoring the loaf allowed it to open up a little bit, and part of that was helped along by that water we threw in the pan there. That steam kind of gives it a little bit of what they call spring. Now, go ahead and cut into this. You don't want to cut into it while it's too hot, so give it a good half hour or so to cool down before you start cutting into it. This is still nice and warm. So we're going to take a little bit of butter on there. Don't be surprised if when this thing is cooling you start hearing some little crackly noises. That's a good thing. So we got a nice color on this. Good stuff. Give it a try.